Okay, good afternoon. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so today we are very happy, and we have Dr. Director Mr. Fernando, Mariano, Schmidt, Hernández. Yeah, to join us and give us some introduction about Chile. So that's I would say that will be a very interesting talk, and that is not only from the culture, not only from the beautiful land, but also you introduce a new direction and a new image of the Chile. So I would say, so the title is Chile Creating Future. So you will see the different viewpoints of the Chile. Okay, next one. So let's see Dr. Schmidt, and right now he serves as the director of the Chilean Trade Office, and he has done various positions in diplomatic and academic field. Okay. So as you can see here, the Ray Schmidt will get institutes such as Asian Institute of Culture and Business. So he knows a lot about Asia. And Asia Pacific Chamber of Commerce for Chile, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Yeah, okay, and it looks like a university. So he was a professor for this one. Okay, so he has lots of roles, including academic director, market advisor, research professor. So it's a broad spectrum. Head of the department in Asia and Oceania and North America. So he held a position, and that is for the very huge area. Okay, so he holds a PhD in Asia Pacific study at the National Zhengzhi University. So that is a university in Taipei. So he knows that very well. And also, he has his master's degree in Spain. Okay, next one. So this is some introduction about the Chilean Trade Office in Taipei. So if after the talk, if you have any, you are interested in knowing more about the Chile, so welcome to contact them. Okay. So let's have the group photo first. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with you, sharing today. This is not my first time in Taita, but this is my first time actually delivering a lecture in Taita, so I'm really happy to do it in this class, and to talk about one of my favorite topics, Chile. Of course, it's something you would expect, but I want to share with you about what is Chile today. That is the goal of my presentation. I want you to take from my presentation what are we doing today, which is probably not what you think we're doing today. I'm going to try to change the mindset that you currently have of Chile. I may be wrong. You may be very familiar with Chile, but maybe not generally. The assumptions that we make of Chile are not those that we are actually being highlighted worldwide for today. So that's why the title of this presentation is Chile Creating Future. It's not about our culture, it's not about our landscapes, it's not about our tourism and scenery, it's not about our fresh fruit, it's not about our copper. It's about everything else that we're doing. And that's why I want to start with this slide right here. And I want to ask you openly, I know this is a big room, so probably it's not easy to answer, but what do you know about Chile? Do you have any volunteers? What comes to your mind when you think about Chile? First thing that pops into your mind.
My name is Leon. I'm from the CSI department. And when I think of Chile, I think of like a very narrow country.
All right, perfect. We are a narrow country. We usually say we're at the end of the world, so that's correct. The shape of Chile usually cuts the attention. If you measure it from north to south, it's over 4,000 kilometers, and from north to south, it's actually the longest country in the world. So, excellent. Anyone else?
What Chile is?
What do you know of Chile? First thing that pops to mind.
Basically, I have a
Cherries. Good one. And the good thing about cherries is that they arrive right before Chinese New Year, so it's the perfect gift. That's why you get a lot of cherries here in Taiwan, a lot of cherries in all of East Asia, and it makes it hard to sell cherries for us in other parts of the world because East Asia wants all the cherries from Chile. Anything else? One more. Come on. Over there.
Copa America winner and Messi retired once.
All right, good. How many times did we win the Copa America?
2, I think.
2 in a row. All right, good. Excellent. All right, so let me start with this slide. The ideas that you have of Chile are of course correct, and this is what we usually project and what people usually think of Chile. What I'm going to talk to you about today is a completely different topic that you probably would not associate with Chile. And that is why last year we launched this campaign called Unboxing Chile, which is about discovering Chile. And what we do with the Unboxing Chile campaign is that we take you from what you know to what you don't know. And as the main KOL for this campaign, we had Alexis Sanchez. Anybody knows who Alexis Sanchez is? Raise your hands if you know Alexis Sanchez. Very few. Anybody knows where he's playing now? Olympique Marseille in France. It's probably his last team. He's about to retire, but he's had a pretty good career. So let me show you quickly this video.
Hola, soy Alexis Sánchez. Le voy a hacer un unboxing con los mejores productos chilenos. Y como se dice en todos lados, si es chileno, es bueno. Cerezas, dulces y rojas. Del sur de Chile, un rico y fresco salmón. Uva chilena, dulces y ricas. Escuchen. Puede ser un Cabernet Sauvignon. ¿Me la puedo llevar? Está buena, ¿eh? Me la llevo yo para la casa. Lo que más extraño de Chile, un buen asado, con un rico cerdo. Es increíble que cada producto me transporte a mi infancia, a la gente de Chile, a mi familia. Cada vez que abras un producto chileno, estás haciendo un unboxing de Chile.
So this is how we start. We start from those common points, those most popular products, those most popular icons like Alexis, and we move on to those issues that you wouldn't know about Chile generally. So now I want to show you some images, and by raise of hands I want to know how many of you can actually identify these people and whether you knew they were Chilean or not. Who knows these two people? This guy right here and this lady right here. Anybody knows them? He is Pablo Neruda, she is Gabriela Mistral. They're both Nobel Prize winners for literature, both from Chile. So this is something that many people usually don't know, but Chile has won 2 literature Nobel Prizes in the past century. Anybody knows these 2 additional images? This movie won the Oscar for the best foreign film 4 years ago. It's called The Fantastic Woman. This movie, it's a short clip. It won also the Oscar for the best short animated film, also from Chile. It's called The Bear Story. Anybody knows this image right here? This is a movie. It's also a documentary. It's a docu-reality, that's what the genre that they choose to call it. And this movie was selected as a runner-up and a finalist for the Oscars in 2 different categories, Best Foreign Film and Best Documentary. It didn't win the Oscar, but it's the first time that one same movie has been selected for 2 different nominations in the same round. Anybody knows this? 2011, 33 miners got trapped underground, and it took 70 days to take them out. And all of them, the 33 miners that got trapped, were taken out alive. It was partially a miracle, but partially also a lot of technical and engineering expertise that we have in Chile that allowed to get them out of a mining that was crumbling down. Anybody knows this person right here? He's the youngest president in the world, President Gabriel Boric. He's 37 years old, and he's our current president. He was elected last year, and he's serving his second year in office. And finally, this one you already mentioned, so I don't need to go into the details. We won Copa America twice in a row, once in Chile, the second one in the US, which was the 100th anniversary of Copa America. So these are some images of what Chile is doing. And what I want to talk to you about today goes from the general to the specific. Of course, this is something that it's what you usually know of Chile, a long strip of land. It's over 4,000 kilometers long. It covers territories on 3 continents, America, of course, where our mainland is. Oceania, because we have Easter Island. I saw the Moai on the introductory slides that you had. The Moai is actually in the middle of the Pacific. It's not too close to Chile. It's a 5-hour flight. So it's basically halfway across the Pacific. But it is part of Chile. Many people, everybody knows the Moai in Taiwan. Not too many people associate them with Chile. And finally, we also have a piece of Antarctica. Under the Antarctic Treaty, there are no sovereignty claims in Antarctica, but there is a division of the countries that have access to research and investigation in the Antarctic region. But besides the landscapes, besides the geographical reality, what we're doing is not about our land. It's about our people. Who is creating future? Chilean people are creating future. That's why we have this campaign, our national theme, like, I don't know if Malaysia still has it, but Malaysia used to have a very good one called Truly Asia. In Chile, we have Creating Future. Because we don't want to be recognized anymore only by our landscapes, or only by our fruit, or only by our products. We want to be recognized by our people, by the powerful inventions that Chileans are today making and that is changing the world. So let me share a small video just to get this topic started.
Look at Chile. Look at what we've got going on here. For more incredible landscapes, today we're telling you about us. The talent of Chilean men and women. We're creating the future here at the southern extreme of the world, where the impossible is possible, making things happen. The energy of this land has given us so much for so long. We want to share all of our contributions with the world. Look up. See the stars? We see there's a whole world ahead. And we've got so much to offer the world that we're anxious to see how far we can go from here. Chile, the experience at the southern edge of the world that invites you to create a better future together. Chile, creating future.
So I gave you the slogan. Now I have to give you the content. It's not just about, it's not enough to say that we're creating future and not share why. I want to share why we are creating future, and I want to share it in 3 different aspects, in 3 different topics. One is on sustainability. I want to talk about sustainable Chile. What are we doing in terms of sustainability that's so important for the world that we say that we are creating future? Secondly, innovation. I want to share what we're doing in terms of innovation, why you should look at Chile when you're thinking about startup ecosystems and about inventions that are actually having a social impact and a global impact. And finally, trading Chile. Why should we think about Chile when we think about the global trade scene? Why is Chile so important? Because if you look at the statistics, of course, it's not going to be top 10, but it could be 11th, it could be, actually for Taiwan, Chile is the number 8th trading partner. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, because it's a country of only 17 million people. In terms of population, we're 6 million less than Taiwan, roughly. And in spite of that, we're able to have a massive trade with the world, the largest free trade area in the world. So these are the 3 topics that I want to cover. I want to go with a little bit more of detail into what we're doing, and this is probably not what you had in mind when you originally thought of Chile. We hosted the COP in 2019, passing over to 2020, and this is our former president, President Piñera, while hosting the COP in the G20 in Osaka Summit, because we were also invited to the G20 during that same year, given that we were hosting both COP and APEC. So for a small country to be hosting 2 massive international conferences in a span of only 1 year, I think that was a very big accomplishment. And the reason why we decided to host COP is because we wanted to share with the world our vision, and we wanted to share with the world what we are doing in Chile in order to achieve that vision. Now, how does that match with Taiwan? Of course, there are 3 points of connection. I'm sure everybody knows this graph. It's a very popular graph in Taiwan for the past year. And there are 3 points of connection where Chile and Taiwan will have to cross paths definitely. The first one is hydrogen. Taiwan is probably never going to be able to produce enough green hydrogen to achieve the 9 to 12% that it wants to achieve in the energy matrix change. Secondly, transportation, electrified or electric transportation. EVs run on batteries, batteries need lithium. Lithium comes either from Chile or from Australia. We are one of the 2 main producers of lithium in the world, and we want to be number 1. And finally, net zero carbon lifestyle. We are producing food that allows you to reduce the footprint in different parts of the world, be it through AI, through agtech, through smart tech, in order to be able to produce clean and healthy food that allows to help the environment. So in these 3 points of connection, of course there are many more, but in these 3, Chile and Taiwan will have to cross paths, and this is something that I want to explore a little bit in detail. So first, lithium. Why should we care about lithium? And why should we care about Chile in terms of lithium? Because Chile is located in the triangle of lithium, which covers both Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. But the largest salt flats are actually in Chile. And the second largest exporter of lithium today is Chile. So in the Atacama salt flat, which is the only one being exploited today out of the 45 salt flats that we have in Chile, you get most of the lithium that all the batteries that go into your computers, your cell phones, if you have an electric vehicle, include lithium very likely from Chile. So in order to power this energy transition, we will need massive amounts of lithium, and lithium is not something that's found very oftenly in the world. So you need to be able first to extract it, and second to extract it sustainably. And that's what we're doing. Our president recently announced the national strategy for lithium in order for us to be able to first enlarge the amount of lithium that we produce, because the world is demanding more and more lithium. If you want to change all the buses into electric buses, all the cars into electric cars, you are going to need a massive amount of batteries, and those batteries will need a massive amount of lithium. So for that, you need to be able to supply lithium that's clean on itself. Otherwise, you're producing cars that come with an added value of dirtiness, of contamination from the source of the extraction of lithium. So one of the key points of the national strategy for lithium is that the companies that want to extract lithium in Chile, they have to adopt new clean technologies to be able to extract it. It's not about just taking it out. So as mentioned, the batteries will require a lot of lithium, and Taiwan wants to be a player in the AV sector. Foxconn, of course, it's the player that's making the highest news in these regards. And Foxconn has been looking at Chile for the past 2 or 3 years because the EV revolution has actually garnered a lot of speed. And that's the reason why Commonwealth Magazine actually did a special about Chile's lithium very recently. This was published about a month and a half ago. So lithium, Chile are starting to sound in the mind of Taiwan, in the business environment of Taiwan. And this is something that, again, it's part of how we are creating the future and how we are changing the image that people usually have of Chile. Secondly, as I announced, green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is basically hydrogen that's extracted using net zero emissions, so you need a lot of renewable energy, in order to produce hydrogen with a renewable energy, so the end result would be zero emission hydrogen, right? That's why it's called green. When we projected the electrification and the change in our energy matrix, we realized that there are some parts of our economy that we will not be able to electrify. In the mining industry, the trucks are as big as half of this room. To put batteries that could power those trucks, the batteries would need to be as big as those trucks. So you need another kind of energy, another source of energy in order to be able to cleanly use the trucks in mining. Heavy industries like steel or cement also are going to require other kinds of energy, more energy intensive, like hydrogen. And the world has estimated that the key to reach net zero, the missing link in electrification, is actually how we incorporate green hydrogen in order to make up for those areas that will not be able to electrify. Now, why Chile? Because Chile has massive potential for the development of green hydrogen, and that comes to the vision that we had 20 years ago in order to go massively into renewables. We will not be able to produce green hydrogen if we don't have enough renewables. And as you see in this map, these are the areas where the different hubs for green hydrogen are right now propping up. Green hydrogen is a long-term story or a medium to long-term story. It's not something that's real now. You do have hydrogen-powered cars, you have fuel cells, you have all the technology required, but it's not mass distributed, it's not mass produced. Now, it seems that it is going to be. The world is betting, one of the big bets that the world has for the future is on hydrogen transportation and the replacement of hydrogen for other fossil fuels. And a large part of the projects that are being developed to produce green hydrogen are in Chile, competing with Australia, of course, East Asia, many parts of Europe, which are more about distribution rather than actually producing green hydrogen, and some parts of North America. But the biggest concentration is here. And when we asked McKinsey, the consulting company, to evaluate how much hydrogen we could produce, they did this evaluation in 2019, and they said that by 2030, we would be producing 8 gigawatts of green hydrogen. They re-evaluated again on June 2022, and considering the amount of projects that had actually been started, they said 33 gigawatts. They did the same measurement on April 2021, and the result was 66 gigawatts. So the amount of hydrogen that we will soon be able to produce, it's increasing massively and exponentially year after year. Now, let me show you this video before I tell you why Chile is capable of producing green hydrogen massively.
¿Recuerdan del video de Al Gore?
Chile, a developing country, but it has great policy. By the end of 2014, more than 400 megawatts. By the end of last year, more than 800 megawatts. So look at what they have under construction this year. Isn't that great? I love this. 13.3 gigawatts.
Algunos pensaron entonces que esa cifra era solo un sueño, una aspiración, influida quizás por una charla que buscaba mover a la acción a otros países más grandes y poderosos que no estaban haciendo en ese frente lo suficiente. Pero ¿saben qué? La historia se ha puesto mucho más emocionante. Vean. En realidad, Chile ha superado por más del doble la cifra de Al Gore. Impresionante, ¿no? Chile sigue inspirando al mundo.
So our bet on renewables is actually paying off today, not only because of the capacity that we have to supply with renewables the Chilean economy, but in order to be able to export green energy, we need to transform it somehow, and the best way to transform it into something that's also green is hydrogen. So now we are capable of injecting enough renewable energy into the electrolyzers to produce green hydrogen, which we can then liquefy and export to different markets around the world. The reason why we are able to produce a lot of renewables is because all the northern part of Chile is actually the driest desert in the world, the Atacama Desert. It gets 360 days of sunlight a year, which is it's really massive, and it has a lot of very highly concentrated power. And then on the southern part, the southern tip of Chile, you get the highest winds in the world. So we can produce onshore energy that's much more efficient than what you can produce in other parts of the world offshore in terms of wind farming. That has allowed us to bring down the prices of renewable energy. We have been able to massify the energy and levelize the costs. So that's why McKinsey, again, this is not a study done by us, McKinsey consulting company, they made this projection on who is going to be able to produce the most effective green hydrogen in the world. And this is the cost per in USD per kilogram of hydrogen by 2030. And Chile is projected to produce green hydrogen at 0.95 per kilo by 2030 in the southern part of Chile and 1.05 in the northern part of Chile. Compared to the follower, which is Australia, we're still cheaper. And even though we're a little bit further from the market, if you get ships that are actually hydrogen powered, that would allow us to overcome that disadvantage, and we can source East Asia with the green hydrogen that is going to need more effectively than Australia or any other competitor. So lithium, green hydrogen are two parts of our energy related strategy. We are also taking a lot of measurements on the environmental front, like having over 6,000 kilometers of coastline where our marine protected areas, which is also something that comes and generates a synergy with what we're doing on the energy front, what we're doing on the innovation front, what we're doing on the food front, and how we're protecting our environmental areas. As you know, Chile is a very long country with only 17 million people. That means it's very unpopulated. Our population density is very low. Therefore, we need to protect the local flora and fauna in order to be able to be one of the lungs of the world in the world that's coming, and this should help us tackle climate change. Now that's the first part of my presentation, is about sustainability. Now let me move on to Innovative Chile. What are we doing on the innovation front? Can anybody recognize any of these three companies? Raise your hands if you do. Well, they're not in Taiwan yet, so it's normal that you don't recognize them. But they're all heavily invested in the US, and hopefully they will be in Taiwan by next year. On year 2020, Chile got its first unicorn, and that same year we got the number 2 and number 3. So in 1 year, 2020, we had 3 unicorns, and in the past we had never had one. Why is that? Because the startup and the innovation community in Chile actually matured enough for this to happen. And these unicorns, which are startups with a valuation of over 1 billion US, are all tech related. They're not, even though, for example, the most iconic one, Notco, the nut company, what they do is produce alternative foods using only vegetable and fruit components. They don't use anything that's animal related, right? Then this is their most iconic product, the nut milk. Are they a food company? They're not a food company. They're an AI company. The core of their business is an AI software that deconstruct the molecules of original milk and reconstruct it using molecules from different fruits and vegetables. So this is the only milk made 100% out of vegetables that will have exact same flavor, exact same texture, exact same color as original milk. So that's the difference with almond milk, with oat milk. It's completely different. The base of this company is actually AI. It's not a company that's... So they are producing food, but their core, what gives them the money is not the food. What gives them the money is the AI behind the food that they're producing. Betterfly is a social startup. They call themselves a social unicorn. It's also an app targeted for companies that allows them to improve the welfare of their employees. So their business model is a bit hard to explain, so I'm not going to go into it. And the other one is Corner Shop. It's a delivery app. It grew very quickly during the pandemic, and Uber bought it for over $1 billion. So now it's Corner Shop by Uber. But it's just to show you a reflection of what's going on in Chile and why are we being noticed in the US today. It's not because of our grapes, it's because of our Notco, our Betterfly, or our Corner Shop. Now, what's going on in Taiwan? Last year we had 6 startups. Some of them would surprise you on what areas they were. Altum Lab, AI Bruna is the software that they developed. They're right now established in Tainan. They're working with both the aquaculture sector and with the smart agriculture sector in order to develop, in order to apply their software, their predictive model software in AI to different production processes. So this company, they won an award by Garage Plus last year, and now they're already installed in Thailand. This company, you can't really see the company here, but it's a company called QSire. This company is on semiconductors. Would you expect a Chilean company to be on semiconductors? Probably not. It's not what people have in mind when they think about Chile. It is what people have in mind when they think about Taiwan. So the connection is pretty evident. And they won an award in the Future Tech Fair last year. Now they're coming back for Computex this year, and they're already working with E3, so they're also settling down in Taiwan. And finally, an EdTech company that was awarded in the pitch contest by Startup Island last year. So this is only 3 things that happened last year, along with other startups that are earning awards in Taiwan. Chile is the #1 in Latin America for innovation. This is not me saying it. This is the Global Innovation Index of 2020. If you look at 2021, 2022, and 2023 is not released yet, but it is expected that this will still be the case for the current year. And the birthplace of this was actually a government program called Startup Chile, which was featured by The Economist, the Economist magazine, on its front cover in 2012. And this was the first government-led program that financed startups that settled in a particular country. Now every country has that. Taiwan has it, Japan has it, Korea has it. But the one that started this kind of programs was actually Chile in 2012. This program is ongoing. It has supported more than 1,600 companies from 85 countries, including Taiwan. And this is the best business accelerator in the region. Now, this was just the kickoff. 2012 was the kickoff. 2022 is when we reach maturity. Because Startup Chile is right now backed with a massive startup ecosystem where different startups, not only from Latin America, but from all parts of the world, go in order to grow their business. Because it's a very open environment for business, it's a friendly environment for business. So Chile has created the conditions for innovation to settle in Chile globally in order to, after that, expand to different markets of the world. And this connects very well with the third point that I'm going to talk to you about later, which is trading Chile. Now, before we go into that, of course, we are producing food massively. And this is something that goes into the more general aspect of what you know of Chile. But these figures are actually pretty impressive. 82 million people every day eat, I'm sorry, I can't read. Eat fresh Chilean fruit. 23 million people, 23 million glasses of Chilean wine are enjoyed every day. 10 million people consume a portion of Chilean salmon. 12 million people eat a portion of Chilean pork. And 638,000 people eat a handful of Chilean nuts every day. Now, these figures are amazing for a country that, again, is pretty small. We are a small country. We're not one of the big countries of Latin America. Big countries are, of course, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. We are probably one of the lowest in terms of population, and in spite of that, we're able to achieve this. We have natural barriers that allow us to do this. So pests, animal pests or fauna pests cannot naturally go into Chile because we're basically isolated. Even though geographically we are not an island, in sanitary terms, we are an island. Because the Atacama Desert in the north, it hinders any pest to cross naturally from the north of Latin America. The Andes mountain range, which is very wide, it also hinders any kind of pest to cross over from Argentina or Bolivia or Peru. And in the south, we have the Antarctica. So you could consider Chile as an island because we have natural barriers in natural terms. And the current trends of development, I'm going to go through this a bit quickly, are what's going on in the industry in Chile is not traditional commodities. What we are developing now is plant-based foods, companies that introduce the concept of circular economy, superfoods, and healthy attributes. This is where the world is looking. That is what the world is looking for, and this is what we are supplying to the world. And finally, in terms of the creative industries, I bet none of you had Chile as a producer, global producer of video games. We are the biggest producer of video games in Latin America. We started with over 60 indie game developers. Now we have 20 to 30 mainstream game developers. They moved out of the indie section into the mainstream. They're producing games for Nintendo Switch, for PS4, PS5, different consoles, and of course PC, Steam, etc. We have a rich literary tradition, Oscar Prize winners, and as I showed at the beginning of the presentation, these are some of the latest games. G.I. Joe for PS4. I think this is Omen of Sorrow, I can't see properly. Yeah, Omen of Sorrow for PS5, Watchmaker, The Mole Agent. So the creative industries are also delivering excellent results that, again, you will probably not associate with Chile. So I'm trying to reinforce the message that what you thought of Chile is true, but it's not all that we have. Finally, I want to conclude with the part about what we do in terms of trade. What is trade in Chile? What are we doing in terms of global trade? Why should you know Chile in terms of foreign trade? Free trade is the core of Chile's growth. In the 1980s, we decided to open up. We decided to go for free trade agreements. We decided to lower our tariff rates. We decided that we were not going to be competitive in manufacturing. We knew East Asia was going to be the manufacturing hub of the world, and we could not compete. So we basically opened up the market, and our manufacturing industry disappeared. What did that produce? It forced us to go into agriculture and services, both at the same time, without having a manufacturing power base. But we could import all the intermediary goods that we needed for both at a very cheap and competitive price, which will allow our services and our food products to go out and compete globally. Now, we today have 32 free trade agreements with 65 economies, covering over 5 billion people and 88% of the global GDP. It's just a list of our FTAs. And you should add to this one, of course, the CPTPP, which we ratified at the beginning of this year, so we're also a member of CPTPP. Why it doesn't really make a difference here is because we already had FTAs with bilateral FTAs with every member in CPTPP. So that's why the discussion about CPTPP in Chile got pushed back a little bit, because the benefit for us of joining CPTPP wasn't so evident. We're not gaining anything in terms of tariffs. We're gaining a little bit better market access to Vietnam and Japan in particular, but with the rest, the market access that we already have through our network of FTAs is the same as we get in CPTPP. Now, we are connecting countries to the global economy, and our vision as an open country has allowed us to develop more quickly, which also allowed us to be the first Latin American country to join the OECD. We have an open, transparent, and dynamic business environment and a stable democracy. In spite of everything that has happened lately, 2019, we had a massive social unrest. There were protests of the cities on the streets of every city in Chile for more than a month and a half. And the way out of that was not a coup. It was not any kind of violent uprisal. It was not the military intervention. We decided to go through a referendum. So we applied democracy in order to sort of let off steam of the issues that were forcing people to go out on the streets and demonstrate. And President Piñera, who was president back then, he finished his term. And then after that, the people of Chile elected current president, President Gabriel Boric. So in spite of that massive shock, our democracy withstood. It was probably the biggest test that we've ever had to withstand, and we made it through. And that speaks of how our institutions are very heavily installed and and they're working properly in the world. We have positioned ourselves as a regional leader in terms of trade, #1 in business environment, #1 in economic freedom. And I want to wrap up this conversation to move into the Q&A about what is Chile and Taiwan. I mean, why should you care about anything that I have just said? What is Chile's presence in Taiwan today? And where my office and my team and my country wants Chile to be in Taiwan in the future. Today we're exporting over 1.4 billion US dollars from Chile to Taiwan every year. Some years it goes up to 1.8, some years it comes down to 1.3, but that's usually the range where we are. That puts us as number 2 in Latin America in terms of exports. Number 1 would be Mexico, number 2 would be Chile. The difference is, first, Mexico is much closer. Second, Mexico has over 100 million people. We're 17 million. We export more than Brazil, we export more than Colombia, we export more than Argentina, by far. So that's pretty interesting for a small country that's so far away. I don't think you couldn't go any further than Chile, and in spite of that, we're able to export over 1 billion worth of goods every year to Taiwan. Now these are dominated, the non-copper exports are dominated by forestry, a lot of pulp, seafood, and fresh fruits. These are traditional commodities. This is what you currently have on your mindset about Chile. And of course, that is the backbone of what we are, but it's not the backbone of where we're going. So we have a commodities-based image, limited added value. This is something that anybody could produce, right? But the difference is that we have nearly 300 exporting companies, and we strive to strengthen the links between Chile and Taiwan into different areas that are not the traditional ones, such as the ones I mentioned in video games, such as startups, such as services. But the most important one, if you look at the future, I have no doubt in my mind, is going to be green hydrogen. Taiwan will need green hydrogen to go through its energy transition. It's basically impossible for Taiwan to produce enough renewable energy to power so many electrolyzers to feed into the green hydrogen that it needs. It would be inefficient as well because the excess capacity in renewables is never going to be large enough because the land is not large enough, the availability or the capacity to produce offshore wind farming is never going to be large enough. So green hydrogen is going to have to be imported. And for that there are two main sources. It's either going to be Chile or Australia. Today, Australia is better positioned. I have to acknowledge Australia is doing a better job than we are in order to engaging with Taiwan in the dialogues on green hydrogen. But I hope that as we create future, we will also be able to engage better with Taiwan in terms of green hydrogen. What are the challenges that we see looking ahead? Of course, persistent inflation. This is a common issue that we face, not only in Taiwan, but all over the world. Inflation is a matter, it's a problem for everybody and for every country in the world. So that, of course, hinders trade because it makes it much more uncertain. The recovery of the tourism industry post-COVID, we see that Taiwan opened up, Chile opened up, but tourism has not recovered to pre-COVID levels. So I think that's also a challenge that's coming up for this year and the next. The new constitution, Chile is right now drafting a new constitution. This process started after the social unrest of 2019. So that's going to establish the new rules of the game for Chile. But the way things are looking right now with our new constitution is that it's not going to be a game changer. The new constitution is going to resemble very much the old constitution, the current constitution. There are going to be some minor changes, particularly regarding the role of the state. We want the role of the state to get bigger instead of the small state that we have right now. Right now, Chile has a subsidiary state, so we let the market take care of many things in which the state, we believe, should be involved, like pensions. 100% of the pension system in Chile is privately owned and privately run. Health, education, and we want a bigger role for the state in this area. So in terms of trade, in terms of the economy, there's not going to be much of a bigger change. Oh, sorry. In internationalization of innovation, we have a massive startup ecosystem. Our startups have already conquered Latin America. They're going aggressively into the US. We want them to come to East Asia. We want them to come to Taiwan. So that's another challenge that we're facing. They face a lot of cultural barriers. They face a lot of misinformation and disinformation with regards to the markets of East Asia. But we want to break those barriers and build the bridges that allow them to cross from the US into East Asia. The entry into force of TPP, and finally the energy transition. Now, to wrap up, this is what I wanted to share with you today. It's the title, going back to the title of my presentation, Chile Creating Future. It's not to eliminate the image that you have of Chile now, but it's to complement it with what we're doing and with what is going to have a bigger impact in the future than the current industries and the current trends that we are right now known for. So that's why I wanted to share this presentation with you. I'm really happy to be here once again. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I really look forward to all the questions that you may have in the Q&A. And if you want to follow us and follow what we do in here as the Chilean Trade Office in Taiwan, please scan that QR and feel free to follow us in order to know what we're doing and how our startups, how our hydrogen is being promoted, and what's coming for the trends of Chile and Taiwan. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and really look forward to your questions. Thank you. Well, with Australia, we have similar weather, similar production patterns, similar way of thinking about the world and the global economy. We consider Australia as like-minded economy, like-minded partner. So we do compete in many areas, but we also cooperate in many others. Our mining industry is heavily developed through Australian investment, as well as Canadian, Japanese, and of course Chilean investment. But Australian investors are one of the largest investors in Chile. There are a lot of connections between Chile and Australia. Chile is the first starting point for Australian students studying Spanish. They do a lot of working holidays in Chile for 6 months to 1 year. They work there, they come back. Same with Chileans in Australia. So the connection is very fluid. We used to have 3 pre-COVID, I don't know if it'll come back to that. 3 daily flights between Santiago, 2 between Santiago and Sydney, 1 between Santiago and Melbourne directly. Every day, so that's a good amount of flights between each other. And Australia as well as New Zealand are 2 countries where we usually benchmark ourselves to. Whatever they are doing in terms of sustainability, in terms of efficiency of production, in terms of investment sectors, in terms of services, we usually look up to them and try to benchmark ourselves with them. So that's the reason why we regularly compare ourselves with Australia. We have similar natural conditions, we have similar paths of development, and we want to achieve the visibility that Australia has today in the global stage, and we believe we have what it takes to achieve that. That's the reason why we compare regularly ourselves with Australia.
Yes, that's pretty similar for the Taiwan and the South Korea.
Exactly.
Where we have very strong both in semiconductor and also different from the Chile and Australia, and we lack of the natural resources. So in Taiwan we don't have lithium, and our solar energy is limited. But hydrogen is pretty important. That is, I think that is a goal, is a direction to Taiwan. But I would say you are right. Right now we should have more aggressive progress in this area. But I'm very happy to see that you have lots of the solar resource, because it's different. Because for the lithium, that's for the battery. For the solar panel or wind, renewable energy, that's to create electricity. But because I'm a professor in EE, so, so actually this kind of renewable energy, you need to use that. You cannot storage. You cannot store the energy. Otherwise, you have to use the hydrogen as a medium, so like a fuel, like a gas to store it.
That's correct.
So,
and in our case, it's not only to store it, but also to export, because we are bound to produce 20 times more renewable energy than we can actually use. So what do we do with the excess capacity? We turn it into hydrogen, so that we can export energy.
Okay.
That's the main reason why.
Okay, so even although you don't have the gasoline, you don't have the oil, but you can export the hydrogen. Yeah, so interesting. That's a very good idea.
We used to be net energy importers up until 5-6 years ago. Now we are net energy exporters. So we export more energy than we're importing these days. We used to import a lot of gas from Argentina, of course a lot of oil from Trinidad and Tobago, from the Caribbean in general, from Brazil, from Bolivia. Now we've cut down because the renewable energy is being injected into our grid, so we don't need as much, our energy requirements from abroad have decreased massively, and now we're exporting more energy than we're importing. So it's interesting how things have actually changed very quickly.
Yeah, right. So I just saw the figure. You have the renewable energy. You have the solar in the northern part and the onshore wind in the southern part, as well as by the water or something.
But water is much less. Most of it is solar, as you say, solar on the north and wind on the south.
So that means the renewable energy right now in Chile is more than enough. Is that right? More than 100%. How do you say that?
No, because there are some industries that require imported oil, like transportation. Okay. So we don't have enough EVs to use that renewable energy and put it into cars. So most cars in Chile still run on oil. So we need to import oil for cars, for trucks, for buses. Our bus fleet, like in Taipei, is mostly electrical today. But in passenger cars, the electrical transformation has not been as quick as we would like.
So that is another direction because lithium, so you can have the collaboration with the bus.
Definitely, yeah. Or Gogoro.
Yeah, Gogoro is pretty nice. Okay.
I have one more question about the deserts. You talked about you have the largest and driest desert in the world. But what does that have to do with solar energy? You made a connection between the desert and solar energy?
Yeah, so it's not the largest, it is the driest. It's not the largest desert in the world. The Sahara is much, much bigger than the Atacama Desert. But the connection with solar energy is the level of radiation that we get. So we get a massive amount with high level of radiation, which allows us, because our grid goes all the way from the north to the south, so it's easily injected, all the solar energy and thermal energy that we produce on the northern part of Chile is easily injected into the grid and distributed throughout Chile. Because all the grids in Chile, the three main grids are actually interconnected, so it's easy to move the energy from one point to the next. So that's the main connection. The radiation level is massive. It's the highest radiation level in the world. It's highest than in the Sahara, it's highest than in Saudi Arabia, it's highest than in the outback in Australia. So that's why the efficiency of producing solar energy in the northern part of Chile is very, very high. Most mining projects in Chile have their own solar parks, and most of their energy needs are actually covered through renewable energy. Of course, again, trucks is something that you cannot power today with electric energy. But once you get hydrogen into the matrix, those trucks will be run by fuel cells on hydrogen, so you could have 100% green copper coming out of Chile, produced 100% with renewable energy sources.
Okay, we have a question down here.
Hello, my name is Peggy, and thank you for your presentation today. And for my question, I would like to ask that, as you mentioned that you have 7 different permits in Chile, and I want to ask that, how do people in Chile adjust themselves to living in different climates?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
How do people adjust themselves living in different climates?
Got it. Well, thank you, Peggy, for your question. I think it's important to clarify that the different weathers are on different parts of the country. So that's why people do not necessarily have to adjust. If you have 4,000 kilometers from north to south, it's hard for people to move around very often. The distances are very long. Usually in Chile, if we drive 5 hours, that's like visiting your neighbor. So when people tell me in Taiwan that going to Kaohsiung is very far, I don't buy it. So it's a different scale that we have. So in the northern part, people that live in the north, they're used to very dry weather. They have almost no winter. The temperature drops at night, like in most deserts, but they don't get any kind of rainy season. All the air is very, very dry. In the southern part of Chile, it's very green, a lot of rainforest, very rainy, very cold. And in the southernmost, you have the glaciers, you have the snow. So, but people usually live in one particular area, so they don't go through the different weathers. They are accustomed to living in one particular weather, where in whichever area they live. And you see some physical differences between the people in the north and the people in the south. People in the south are mostly very pale skinned. People in the north, of course, have received such a massive amount of radiation that their skin turns to turn darker. It's not so hard to identify who comes from the southernmost tip of Chile and who comes from the northernmost tip of Chile. But people usually do not have to accustom to different weathers throughout the year, because they live in one particular area of Chile where they have one particular weather. And the concentration of the population, it's heavily concentrated on the central area, which is where in the central area you have Mediterranean weather. So the weather in Spain, in most parts of Spain, is very similar to the weather that you have in Santiago, in Valparaiso, and all the central area of Chile.
Very good question. Do we have any more from the audience before we go to Slido? Any other questions about Chile, its culture, its food, its festivals, its innovation? Any more questions? Yes, we have one here.
Hi, I'd just like to know more about your business, your office's business in Taiwan, and is there a Chilean business community in Taiwan? Is it strong, or is there a Taiwanese business community in Chile, and how can those communities work together to foster the economic relationship or trade between two countries?
Perfect. Thank you for your questions. I think there are many aspects to that question, so let me cover them one by one. If I miss one, let me know so that I can go back to that one. First, what we do in our office, to put it in very simple terms, we connect exporters in Chile with importers in Taiwan. We promote trade or exports of Chilean goods and services into Taiwan. So, for example, this morning we had an online B2B business matching for agro-industry, that's dehydrated, lyophilized, and dried fruits and nuts. So we connected 17 exporters in Chile with importers in Taiwan so that they will evaluate business opportunities. So of course it's hard to arrange because of the 12-hour difference, but if you want to do business from Chile into the world, you have to connect at 9, 10, 11 p.m. in the afternoon. It's how it works. So we had a very good participation. And of course, you already get a lot of raisins, a lot of prunes, a lot of almonds and walnuts from Chile here in Taiwan. But we always want to give opportunities to more exporters to join the market. So that's the core of what we do. Of course, we support startups. We link the startup ecosystems. We look for investment in different areas such as lithium or hydrogen. And that incorporates into how we promote the Chilean economy in Taiwan, both in terms of promoting exports and attracting investment. Secondly, the Chilean business community in Taiwan is very small. Very, very small, because most Chilean companies usually choose one headquarter for East Asia, and most of them are in Shanghai. So we have over 20 wineries, for example, to go into the wine sector, that they have their own office in Shanghai, and from the Shanghai office they cover Japan, they cover Korea, they cover Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. So the East Asian markets are very well integrated, so they usually settle for the biggest market, and the biggest market for us is China, and Shanghai is the biggest trading city in China. So that's why most of them are in Shanghai. For the salmon industry, it's different. Most of them are in Tokyo, because Japan is our largest market for salmon. But in general, Shanghai is usually the spot where they go. In Taiwan, we have only one fresh fruit business settling here and 2 wineries. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no trade relation. Of course, there's a lot of trade, but Chilean companies trust heavily on their importers in Taiwan. So their business counterparts here are the ones that really push the brand, they push the products, they push the goods. That's how it works. So the level of trust that they have with their Taiwanese counterparts is much higher than the level of trust in business that they have with their Chinese counterparts. And that's why they open, many of them open their offices in China, because they need to supervise the market more closely. Here there is a higher level of trust. About the Taiwanese business community in Chile, there is a Taiwanese community of 400 to 500 Taiwanese citizens living in Chile. Many of them already second generation, third generation, and they focus on two areas. The biggest community now is in Santiago, but the oldest community is actually in Iquique, in the northern part of Chile. It's one of the northernmost cities of Chile, and it's a free trade zone. And that's why they settled here. They went to Iquique in order to make the best use of the free trade zone of Iquique in order to export both to Chile, but also to Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. From Iquique, they usually started their importing business, and those imports they re-exported to all of Latin America. Now, the biggest community today is in Santiago, and you have, of course, all the big companies from Taiwan already have their own office in Santiago. Evergreen, Asus, Acer, MSI, Gigabyte, they all have offices in Santiago. So there is an interesting business community. It's not massive. I think the level of investment should be higher if Taiwan wants to influence at the policy level. Because for all of these companies that I just mentioned, their Santiago office is mostly a rep office and sales office. There's no very limited investment from Taiwan in Chile. If Foxconn, and I'm thinking out loud, if Foxconn were to set up a factory producing manufacturing industry in Chile in order to source the batteries for their EVs, of course they will have a much bigger voice than Asus, who has 5-6 people, and they basically ship their computers and they sell. So of course their policy involvement is much lower than it is when you have actual materialized investment. Did I miss anything? All right.
Do we have any more questions from our audience before? Okay, we do.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and thank you for the presentation. So I just want to ask, you said that Chile has many skilled people, that's why the startups are developing so fast. So I just want to ask, what's the key process and accomplishment? Is it the education system, or are there other factors that affect these people? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So the key for the startup ecosystem in Chile, right? Did I get that right? Okay, so when it started, 2010, 2012, with Startup Chile, which was the first one, it was about the capital. Startup Chile gives $50K to $100K US dollars to each startup that's selected into the program. So of course, for any startup, that's free money. Now, 100K in 2010 is very different from 100K today. So that's how we started the program of talent attraction. Now that generated a mass of startups that have not only arrived in Chile, learned about Chile, but also failed in Chile, many of them, right? And failure is probably the most important thing that you can have as a startup. Why? Because you learn what not to do, right? So many people can tell you what to do. You have tutorials on YouTube on what to do, you have books on what to do. Everybody will show you what to do. The most important gain, the most important knowledge that you can get when you're a startup is what not to do. And for that you need to fail, right? So many startups have been working, and some of them of course succeeding in Chile, some of them failing. But those that fail come back again, and they come back stronger. So that has generated an ecosystem that's very powerful in Chile, where failing is not a problem. The ecosystem, the venture capital, the banking system will allow you to get up on your feet and go on with your next idea, right? So the mindset that you have in Chile for entrepreneurship is very strong. It's very strong as you have it, because we learn from the US, we learn from Silicon Valley, we learn from the Miami hub, we learn of course from Singapore. And the important part is that this, since 2010, has created not only a mass of entrepreneurs, but also a mass of institutions that support those entrepreneurs. So now you have an ecosystem that's very big in terms of size, but also very global, because most of the talent that we initially attracted was actually foreign talent. It wasn't Chilean talent. Now we're developing Chilean talent along with foreign talent. So that creates a global ecosystem that allows you to succeed, and it allows you to fail as well.
I have a follow-up question. So how about your education system? So how do you encourage the, I'm not quite sure, but how do you encourage the people, especially the young people, especially the students, to have this mindset for the innovation to have their start?
I have to separate the school education from university education. Our school education, elementary, middle school, high school, is not globally recognized. We are not top rankers. We do not have a successful school system, but we have a very successful university system. So what that produces is that when you get to university, your world changes and you are forced to change with your world, right? And our university system has adapted a lot to be like or resemble the American system, where the entrepreneurial mindset, where the defining of your own problems in order to find your own solutions is fostered, rather than a top-down dynamic from the professor down, right? So we've tried to eliminate hierarchies in universities, and that is not allowed. That's facilitated by the fact that most of our university system is actually private universities. Our state-owned or national universities are very little, and so they're big universities, but there aren't that many. Most of our students study on private universities, and these private universities have more flexibility to adopt different education methods. And that has also forced our national universities to evolve with the private universities in order to compete. So I think that's part of the question. I have not done any research on this issue myself, but I believe that that's part of the reason why at the educational level we are able to foster this entrepreneurial mindset.
So that's very important lesson for us, because in NTU right now we also have a new college we call it D-School Design. So we encourage the students to have some freestyle thinking, multidisciplinary, and to think about some, not only the solution, but also we need to think about some questions. Yeah, and solve this question. And I also have a follow-up question about the trade, because in your speech you talk about actually Chile decided to the two directions is agriculture and services for the Chile direction. But for example, for some investment in Chile, so for example, on the Foxconn, you mentioned about maybe have some manufacturing in Chile. So do you think it's possible, because is that aligned with your strategy, direction, or about your, can you provide this kind of engineering in Chile?
Thank you. So that's a very good question, Dr. Lee. I think so. We didn't decide to eliminate manufacturing. We decided to let the market decide what we were efficient on, right? So I believe that considering the advancements in education in Chile, considering the startup ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem, today we have enough manpower for this kind of higher level industries to take hold in Chile. Low-end manufacturing, we are never going to be competitive. Our salaries are much higher than the average Latin American salaries, and the minimum salary is actually rising in Chile very quickly, not only because of inflation, but also because of the demands of our citizens in order to have higher levels of welfare, right? So in terms of low-end manufacturing, we are never going to be competitive. But in the case of batteries in particular, I'm pretty sure that being sourced, close to the source of lithium and being able to extract lithium by yourself will allow you to cover at least the initial part of the manufacturing process. It doesn't have to include the whole manufacturing process. But if you extract the lithium, if you own the lithium, you'll probably have a head advantage or a head on the race for the battery production. Lithium is considered not only in Chile but globally a strategic good, right? Like rare earth minerals and the likes. And it's going to be particularly strategic during the EV transition and the electrical transition. So the access to lithium is going to play both economically but also strategically. who owns the lithium and who can actually manufacture based on lithium is going to rely on the resources. And I have to say that the biggest investment in Chile today in terms of lithium is from China. So there are two companies exporting and producing lithium in Chile. One is SQM, the other one is Albemarle. Albemarle has a 40% share, SQM has 60%. And SQM is owned in over 50% by Tianqi, the Chinese company. So the biggest stake in Chilean lithium today is owned by China. And if this becomes a geostrategic issue, I think the access to lithium is going to matter, and it's going to matter profoundly.
Okay,
any more questions from the audience? Okay, I do have one more question about your tourism. So you said one of the challenges in your last slide, you said one of your challenges is tourism is down after COVID. Do you expect it to rise? And how much did tourism play in your economy before it fell due to COVID?
For us, tourism is very seasonal. We don't have year-round tourism. We usually get a lot of tourist influx during our summer, even though we have some adventure tourism and a lot of people go to ski in Chile or snowboard in Chile or rock climb in Chile. But that's, in terms of the mass numbers, it's a limited percentage. Most of our tourism is actually summer tourism, and it's summer tourism that comes massively from Argentina, Brazil, the US, and some parts of Europe, particularly Spain, because there are no language barriers, right? And that tourism has not fully recovered. Argentina is undergoing a critical economic situation. This is anecdotal, but you see in the news in Chile, or mostly in social media in Chile, a lot of people that cross over to Argentina, they buy a truckload of groceries and they come back to Chile because it's so cheap right now. And the fact that it's so cheap means that the acquisition power globally that Argentina has today is more limited. That means that outbound tourism is bound to suffer. So I think that's one of the reasons that we are facing in our tourism industry. There's a decreased level of Argentinian and Brazilian tourists. But as long as the global economy picks up, hopefully on the second semester of this year, the tourism should come back to pre-pandemic level. Another challenge is that a lot of companies in the tourism industry bankrupted during the COVID pandemic. So rebuilding that industry, that sector, takes a while. So particularly on the southern part of Chile, which receives the biggest inflow of tourism in Chile, more than the north, there were massive bankruptcies during the COVID pandemic. So in order to get the demand to come back, you need to have the offer. And that offer is building little by little.
So you said the South is suffering the most from lack of tourism?
Yes.
And the South has the connection to the Antarctic?
That's the southernmost tip, yeah. But most of the tourism in the south is actually on the area, it's the region called the Lakes region and the Rivers region, which are still, if you drive, like 20 to 30 hours away from the place where you connect with the Antarctica. If you want to connect to Antarctica, you have to fly to Punta Arenas. And from Punta Arenas, you take the ships that will take you to the Antarctica. Now, that tourism hasn't suffered because that's very high-end tourism, and it's limited. The number of people that can travel to Antarctica is very limited. So you will always find enough people to cover the seats of, that you can actually take to Antarctica. So, and there are only, first there's a limited number of months on which you can travel to Antarctica, only during the summer months, and there are a limited number of ships. And you can only, if you go to Latin America, you can only leave from Ushuaia in Argentina or from Punta Arenas in Chile.
All right, let's go to slide up for the remainder of our questions.
All right, so let me go in order. First one is in Spanish, so should I answer in Spanish? No, I'll answer in English. So it's about the, oh, I'm sorry, another one came in. you go, I'm getting confused. So it's about the political area in Chile. This is moving around. Because we have a good political model. All right. So the political area in Chile is very stable, but right now we're undergoing a transition and our political system is very fractured, right? So we used to have two big coalitions that would change power from, like you have in Taiwan, from green to blue, blue to green, green to blue, blue to green. Only two parties. That makes the system very stable. Now Taiwan is having a third party on itself right now, the White Party. It's up for grabs on what's going to happen on the presidential election. We used to have a similar situation with the right and left, right? So it was the center right versus the center left, and they exchanged governments regularly. There was a generational change 4 or 5 years ago, and that added 2 additional coalitions. So now you have the far left, which are basically the sons and daughters of the center left. Then you have the far right, same, sons and daughters of the center right. And you still have the center right and the center left. So the political sphere has actually become much more complex in Chile over the past year. And that's why we usually say that we're undergoing a transition. We're undergoing a transition that pushed us into the discussion for a new constitution, onto how we do things, how we move towards the future. Now, most of the ideas that we have about where we want to go as a country are shared between both parties. Where we want to go, we share the same goal. How we want to get there, that's where the discussion is. And that's what's making a fracture between the different parties in Chile. Now, with that said, the political institutions in Chile have been very stable. We have strongly applied both OECD parameters in order to make sure that all our institutions are transparent, are efficient, are effective, and are solid in terms of personnel selection, for example, in terms of public policy development, etc. So, and that comes from a social domestic consensus on how to move forward. We need a state that's solid in order to move forward. And the state was built that way so that it wouldn't be easily interfered by foreign parties. What this produces is that every time you have a new government, the government usually deviates from its program in order to move to the center. And that's what's happened with every government in the past, and it's of course happening with the current government. It deviates to move to the center. So the original ideas, the campaign ideas, have to change a little bit in order to accommodate the reality, and that makes the system very stable. Now that's the first question. Let me go with the second one. I'm curious about that if we visit Chile, what kind of things would you recommend to buy as souvenir? Wine, of course, a lot of wine. There are many souvenirs in Chile. In terms of handcrafts, we work a lot with copper. Of course, it's our main export item. We have a very strong copper industry, and that has also driven into very interesting copper handcraft. So you have copper pens, copper artisans, copper necklaces, copper everything. So that's very unique of Chile, and it is very interesting. We also have handcrafts on the southern part of Chile related to wool. So you have a lot of wool hats, wool ponchos, wool, different accessories made of wool. And Easter Island, you need to buy a moai. You have to get a moai for yourself. So I would say those are the main ones. But of course, wine is always something that you can open a bottle and enjoy with your friends. It provides for a good conversation. So I think wine is probably number one on my list. Now, which one word would you choose to describe Chile? That's a tough one. When I think about Chile in one word, I would say resilient. I would say that's the most, for me, the one that I believe describes Chile the best. We've gone through massive earthquakes. 2010, we had a 9.2 earthquake in the southern part of Chile. We went through tsunamis. Last summer, we went through massive wildfires. Over 400,000 hectares were burned in Chile. That's, if I'm not mistaken, about 8% of the total landmass of Taiwan burned completely. but we get up. We get together. Every time we face, it doesn't matter how many differences we have, every time we face a challenge, we face a disaster, Chileans always get together. And that makes us very resilient. It doesn't matter how many disasters affect the country, we get together, we build back up, and we build back better. And I think that's the key concept that I would choose in order to describe Chile, resilient. Now, according to your speech, Chile is trying hard to reach net zero. And will you think that carbon tax or carbon trade is a good way to reach the goal? I believe the world is walking that way. The world is moving towards a carbon tax. There are many discussions, many papers coming out of the OECD in order how to tackle this. And today, the sustainable production is being valued by consumers. It's not being punished by governments, but it is being valued by consumers, particularly in Europe and in East Asia, a market like Japan. They do value that a company is able to produce sustainably, generating less or no carbon footprints, and the consumers are willing to buy more or pay more for this kind of goods and services. So I think there is already a global mindset that promotes, so if we talk about carrots and sticks, we already have the carrots, we don't have the sticks, but I think the world is going in that way to make sure that the whole industry moves in that direction. Today the industry is already moving in that direction, but they're moving out of the will of the consumers. They're not moving out of the will of the law. So I think these two discussions are bound to merge, and I think it is a good way to move forward. I heard countries in South America continent don't like the US. Is that real? I can only talk for Chile. I'm not going to talk for Argentina or Brazil or Peru or Bolivia. People in Chile admire the US a lot. So we look up to the US. Of course, there are some things with which we disagree on with the US, like we disagree with many other countries. But there is an admiration for the way in which the US has grown, in which the US has developed, the way in which the US democracy works, the way in which Silicon Valley grew, the entrepreneurial mindset, and as your question, Dr. Lee, referred to before, our educational system looks up to the US educational system very heavily. So for 5 years, we had a very intense and massive scholarship program in Chile called Becas Chile, basically Chile Scholarship, not a very creative name. But we sent out thousands, literally thousands of masters and PhD students out every year to get their masters and PhDs abroad. 90% of the applicants apply to US universities. You have 10% Europe, or 9% Europe, 1% Latin America or East Asia. But most of them, if the perception in Chile is that if you have a degree from the US, doesn't matter which university, it's a good degree. You study in the US, you learn from the US. So in the case of Chile, the perception of the US is very positive. Of course, there is disagreement on the way in which sometimes they do things internationally, particularly on the sustainable area. For example, the US leaving the Paris Climate Agreement was a big shock in Chile, as it was a big shock for many parts of the world. The same with the CPTPP. When the US pulled out of the CPTPP, which is an agreement we were originally part of, that was also a big shock. So of course there are disagreements, but socially I believe there's more admiration than, sorry, what was the word you used? I lost the question, but there's more admiration than anything towards the US in the case of Chile. I can't talk for the rest of Latin America. I think that's for other directors to talk about.
Do you mind to share about yourself, because you are not the 90% to the US. You are 9% to Spain, and I don't know how much the percentage to Taiwan for PhD.
Yeah, but I didn't take part on the Becas Chile program. I came here with a Taiwan scholarship program, so it's a different program. And well, there was actually a bias towards the US in the application system. Why? Because in order to get the scholarship, you had to apply to one of the top 100 universities in the world. by either the Times ranking or the Shanghai ranking. They didn't include the HS ranking, and the HS is more biased towards East Asia, right? So if you wanted to get the scholarship, you had to apply to a top 100 university, and most top 100 universities in Times and Shanghai ranking were in the US. So there was a bias in the application, but people look forward to studying in the US. My case, it's a weird case. My dad is a diplomat. Also, he's retired now. So I lived a large part of my life out of Chile. I finished my high school in South Korea. I lived in Australia after that. I went back to Chile for my bachelor degree. And I did live in Chile when I was younger. But I've lived more time in East Asia than I've lived in Chile. So I don't think my answer would count as an average Chilean in this case. All right, let me take one more. In terms of transportation, what is your major and fastest public transportation to travel from north to south, and how long does it take? Only plane. In Chile, it's very ineffective to have any other kind of transportation. Buses take too long. High-speed rails are too expensive to operate for such long distances with too little people. Of course, in China, you have high-speed rails crossing all over China. That's massive distances, but you have a massive amount of people. In the northern part of Chile, cities usually have 100,000 to 100,000 inhabitants. So, as I mentioned before, the population is heavily concentrated in Santiago, the capital city, where we have 7 million people. And then Valparaíso, which is Santiago's main port, where you have 1.5 million. So in the central area, you have roughly 9 million people. In the whole rest of the country, you have the other 8 million people living. So with a population that's so unevenly distributed, any other means of transportation wouldn't really make sense. It wouldn't be effective in terms of budget management. Commercially, it wouldn't make sense. Buses just take too long. So if you can take a bus from Arica in the northern part, the northernmost city of Chile, to Santiago, and it'll take you like 2 or 3 days, more or less. So nobody wants to be sitting on a bus for 2 or 3 days. You can fly, it'll take you 3 hours and a half, 4 hours.
But in Taiwan, sometimes I think for people who like to ride a bike to across the Taiwan island, it takes maybe a week or so. But it's common in Chile to do something like that, drive or.
So yeah, people love biking in Chile. We have the Tour of Chile is our main competition. It's not nearly as popular as the ones you have in Europe, like the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia or the Spanish Lap. But it's an interesting competition, and it's mostly from the center to the south. The center to the north, the weather is too hot, it's too dry. You dehydrate very quickly, so it makes it a bit dangerous to have such a long distance sport. So mostly on the south.